All right, we're rolling. Welcome back to the Low Carb Consultant podcast. Today, we are joined by Dani Conway, a board-certified functional nutrition practitioner, hormone and gut health specialist, and the founder of Nutrition the Natural Way. After years of yo-yo dieting and metabolic frustration, Dani transformed herself by refining macros, testing instead of guessing, and building a food first system that heals gut issues, stabilizes hormones, and helps women over 40 reclaim energy and body composition. In this episode today, we'll unpack her unique approach to keto, carnivore, and metabolic reset, what actually works for long term sustainability, and how to build your metabolism without the burnout. So, Dani, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's like I said earlier, it's a pleasure to finally meet you here. I know we've been chatting back and forth for a couple months. It took some time to book this, but I'm glad we're finally here.
Me too, Max. Thanks so much for having me. All of my favorite topics you just mentioned. So I'm super excited to get into whatever questions you have today.
Yeah, me too. And as I typically say, maybe before we get into all of the fun stuff, would you mind giving the listeners just a real brief background on yourself, but maybe what drove you towards this lifestyle, way of eating that you're currently living now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was 65 pounds overweight on a fat-free diet. I had tons of hormone and gut issues. I was in my 20s. I was following all of the typical yo-yo dieting, bro diets, chicken, brown rice, and broccoli, and doing hours of cardio in the gym. And I would lose weight, I would gain weight, I would lose weight, I would count points, I would lose weight, I would gain it back, I would count calories, I would restrict calories, all of those things. That all just set me down a path looking for something different because the traditional diet culture wasn't working for me. And so I started into low carb eating in probably 2006, 2007, led into keto, led into carnivore, led into functional medicine, my test don't guess approach because all of my blood work was normal. That's what the doctor said. Yet I still felt like crap. I was still dealing with a ton of hormone and gut issues. I lost a little bit of weight, but there was still a lot more that I had to work on. And that's kind of the short story of how I got to where I am now.
Interesting. So going from like an ex-overweight individual and a yo-yo dieter to now like a functional nutrition expert, like was there a specific, maybe like a turning point in that journey that made you say like, I need a different approach at all?
Yeah, it was just the over and over again of doing what the diet culture was teaching. I had friends who are personal trainers, chicken, brown rice, and broccoli, tons of cardio, all of that. And it wasn't working. Like it just wasn't working. The whole eat less, weigh less. I ate less and I weighed more. so
Yeah,
so for me, it was like,
yeah.
okay, I had to find something different. I struggled. So some of my biggest struggles were food cravings and excessive hunger. And anyone who's ever restricted their calories knows that if they've struggled with cravings or excessive hunger, that restricted calories doesn't that approach doesn't last very long until
Mhm.
you end up overeating because you just are so hungry.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of, I like to say like at that point in time, I had a lot of cravings for ice cream. But what I realized is that there was not really a shortage of ice cream in my body. There
Mhm.
was a shortage of good fats and good quality protein. And so once that shifted, and once I started eating more steak, more butter, more cheese. And I'm going to say, like, as a side note, people think that those foods are kind of like not the mainstream now. I will tell you that in 2006 and 2007, they were really not the mainstream.
Oh
Like, it
yeah.
was really crazy back then. So I started to feel better. I started to get a handle on my cravings, on my excessive hunger issues. And then, I did drop some weight and have some results. And like I said, that kind of led me into like, okay, I was still having some hormone deficiencies, still having some hormone problems, all of that. And that kind of led me into that whole functional medicine path as well.
Sure. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And going back to, the progression to these different diets, because I'm a big fan of low carb. I'm obviously
Hmm.
we're on the Low Carb Consultant podcast,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I'm a big fan. Like I look at these diets as tools. Some days I eat carnivore, some days I eat low carb, some days I'll eat more ketogenic. And I kind of flex
Love
these
that.
diets. Yeah, I flex these diets periodically throughout the week to give myself some long-term sustainability. But I've always wanted to ask someone this question. So when you started off, I think you said it was back in 2006, 2007, correct? What was the catalyst for jumping to a different diet? Like if you did you start off on low carb and then did you move to keto and then it sounds like you moved to carnivore, correct? Was there at
Yeah.
all like a reason for making the change? Like, okay, like this diet worked great, but I'm ready for the next thing, or the diet fixed some of the issues, but not everything, so I'm going to move to the next thing. I was kind of curious to see your progression.
So, first, I think this is important because there's so many women out there that are afraid to say that they have weight loss and fat loss results because that is a reflection of vanity.
Mm,
I will say that I started changing my diet and I was wanting to try this approach because it was 100% vanity. I was in my 20s. I did not like the way I looked. I wanted to look a certain way. I worked out a lot, but didn't feel like my body reflected my effort in the gym.
mm.
And truth be told, it was at that point in time 100% vanity. And I'm not ashamed to say that because I think that within the carnivore space, especially. And I do agree, we have to, I call it rebalance the body from the inside out. Many people call it heal the body, whatever term you want to use. That being said, weight loss does happen as a byproduct of the body being healthy and in balance. And it's okay to have weight loss goals. It's okay to have fat loss goals, along with having health goals and longevity goals and vitality goals and all that stuff that goes together. So to answer your question, what was the catalyst? 100% my weight, 100% my vanity. Now, does that mean that that was how it stayed? No, of course it progressed into the long-term health aspect of it. I was in my 20s at the time and I didn't quite frankly know how I would make it to my 40s feeling the way I did. And now I'm 49 and I feel better than I ever have in my entire life.
Let's pause on that one really quickly because I
Okay.
think that's really interesting what you said in terms of, the main reason in the beginning was vanity. And I wanted to pause here because I was talking with, I believe I had Martin Silva on the podcast like last week, and we're talking about he's a coach and we talk about like what are your whys, like dealing like talking with clients and helping them to figure out their whys because that's going to help them keep them on track and having strong whys. And to be honest with you, I think it's a perfectly strong why to want to look better and want to not just feel better, but have it be a vanity driven why. Like you want to look in the mirror and like the person that you're seeing, because that's going
Yes.
to just help with so many other things like confidence, going out, talking with people, being more confident within yourself. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Having a vanity driven why, I think it's really important. But then going back to and how I think these diets are tools, right? At some point, you probably got in shape and then your goals maybe shifted. There were some other things you
Yes.
wanted to fix, and that maybe was the catalyst to switch to a different low carb option, whether it was keto or carnivore. I'm guessing that's maybe what happened with you.
So a little bit. So just, I love how you said that you kind of have used this, we'll just call it a generalized term like way of eating low carb through carnivore as
Mhm.
a way to flex back and forth depending on what
Goals.
wherever you are.
Sure.
Now, that being said, like I work with clients on a spectrum of low carb through carnivore because I don't believe everyone needs to be carnivore. And I believe that some people that are low carb need to do something further to get to their actual results that they want to get to. So, with that being said, it wasn't a progression because of symptoms for me. It was more of a progression of, okay, when I started this, I was sort of like I had done Atkins, which is kind of like the version of low carb, and researched and found ketogenic and keto, the keto diet, and did that, and then kind of progressed into carnivore because I
Mm.
felt the best eating mainly protein and fat. So, and then after that, that was around 2012. And then over the years, subsequent to that, I would here and there, I would add some veggies back and I'd be like, meh, I don't, not really a big deal for me. Or I would have a flare up of gut issues or whatever. And then I would remove those foods and I was perfectly happy and felt great. And the result continued over that time frame.
That's so awesome. Well, first off, I'm glad you found And that's what's cool, I think, about all these diets. I honestly think, you mentioned earlier, not everyone needs to do or has to do carnivore. I would agree.
Mhm.
But what I do think people need to do is experiment with these diets for sure. Like go low carb for a certain amount of time, try keto for a certain amount of time, try carnivore for a certain amount of time, and then kind of find a diet variation that works for you, your goals, what you're trying to accomplish, whether it's healing from the inside out, autoimmune issues, gut issues, mental health
Right.
issues, or fat loss, weight loss, body compositions. Like all these different diets can be essentially manipulated in a certain way based off what you want to get out of them. That's why I say diets are tools. But it's cool to kind of get a good sense of your progression and how you're eating now. So it sounds like to me you're pretty much, would you say, strict carnivore? Is it, would you say that, or?
Well, so I'm carnivore. I include spices. I drink a little coffee and good quality decaf. And
Mhm.
I use, a lot of beef protein powder for my morning, like post training before I ride my horses. Various shakes with bone broth, eggs, egg yolks. That kind of stuff works for me really well for breakfast. Some people have their opinions on whether protein powder is carnivore. That's to their opinion and they can think whatever they want to think. But,
Mhm.
for the most part, like I said, carnivore with those, few additions as well. That's what works best for me. And, one of my goals for clients always is that they find that we figure something for them that's both sustainable and they get the results they're looking for.
Mm.
So whether that's going carnivore for a bit of time and then backing off to keto or low carb, or they decide they want to stay carnivore long term, or they add a couple of foods back, like whatever that is, it's very individual. It's going to, should support their own body, their metabolism, and of course their goals and their lifestyle, like what feels sustainable for them long term. And I know that what I'm doing is sustainable for me long term as well.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. And I want to shift into like what we were talking about a little bit earlier in regards to like keto and
Mm,
carnivore, but also like peptides and biohacking,
yeah.
trying to get into some of the fun stuff. But actually, since we're on this topic, because I did have a question here for you in terms of like, what does your day to day look like? I know you were just kind of laying out the types of foods that you're eating, but like, do you ever implement any sort of like fasting, intermittent fasting? Like can you walk us through like a day in a life of Dani,
Yes.
where like maybe you wake up, do you just have coffee? Like when's your first meal? Like, oh, can you walk us through what that looks like for you specifically?
Absolutely. So, okay, so let's see. So it depends on whether I have a regular day where I'm in my office
Mm,
or a day where I'm riding my horses. So if it's a regular office day, I usually do a little bit longer intermittent fast, maybe probably 14 to 16 hours. I typically don't go much above 16 hours. I love intermittent fasting. I think it's a great tool. That being said, I also have an approach that I call fueling before fasting, where this is what I've done personally. And a lot of my women clients,
mhm,
they need to get what they're doing correct in their eating window before
mm.
they start extending their fasting window, especially
Ah,
if they have a history of chronic yo yo dieting and under eating. So I just want to say that with a caveat because I don't want someone to hear this and think, oh, she does intermittent fasting 16 hours. I'm just going to jump right into that.
yeah.
If you are fed well, so to speak, for a period of time, and it might be 3 months, 6 months, a year, then your metabolism is ready for you to start doing some fasting. So I'm at a point now where, I did not do any fasting for a lot of years because of that. So in any case, I love intermittent fasting. It's a great break for digestion. I fell into it probably around 2012 when I was having a lot of digestive issues. Anyways, back to your question. Sorry, I got off on a little tangent
No
there.
worries.
So regular in office day, intermittent fast, usually about 14 to 16 hours. First meal is a beef protein shake. Like I said, variation of beef protein, bone broth, decaf, eggs, egg yolks, ghee, butter, electrolytes, some kind of mix of that, usually about
Mhm.
50 to 60 grams of protein in that shake. And then the fat is just going to depend on how I'm feeling, what my sort of plan is for the rest of the day, all of that in terms of food. Meal number two, my lunch. So I'm a 3 meal a day girl, even within an 8 to 10 hour eating window.
Mhm.
Lunch is usually I say lighter protein. Turkey, seafood are generally my go-tos for lunch. So, like I said, turkey, salmon, leftover shrimp, for the most part. Sometimes a little bit of bacon, sometimes a little bit of pork belly added to
Mm.
that. And then dinner is almost always beef. Everyone knows I love beef, pork, or seafood. So, guess I just kind of vary those up, and that's what works best for me on my, like I said, my in office days, on the days that I ride my horses. So that's going to be shake for breakfast. Still, it's still kind of the same. It's just the fasting schedule. There's usually not really a fasting schedule. Usually
Hmm.
it's about a 12-hour overnight intermittent fasting window. And
Yeah.
then first meal is the shake. And then same with the second and third meal. It's just the timing is a little bit different.
Yeah, and I think that's really important for people to understand is you're basically because I kind of do the same thing too. Like I typically on days that I have podcasts, I won't eat until after I do the podcast. Like I just
Mhm.
feel more sharp going into a
Yeah.
podcast when I don't have a big meal. But like I think it's really smart to like look at your eating window or your eating frequency based off what you got going on in the day. Like and that takes a little bit of awareness and I understand people might not want to do that because it could be a little time consuming to constantly think about like what you're going to eat or when you're going to eat, but then at the same time you could always just fast. But what I'm saying here is I think it's really good to be self-aware around like, hey, this is what I'm doing this day. This is how I'm going to fuel for my day based off like what I'm doing. And I think that's a really smart way to eat to ultimately feel your best based off whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with that. Number one. Number two, the body adapts. So I always
Mm,
talk to women who say, I've been on the same intermittent fasting schedule for 6 months and I'm not losing weight. That's probably why you're not losing weight,
yeah.
because your body is now adapted to that exact schedule and you haven't changed anything, right? So keep the body guessing is what I like to say. And the other thing, I did forget to answer part of your question. So I don't do coffee as soon as I wake up in the morning. I
Mm,
wake up, I have my morning routine, which is usually in the wintertime, red light, vibration plate, infrared sauna. Then I'll do like a little shot of regular coffee as a pre workout, get my workout in. And then, like I said, office day, I'm kind of done with the workout at that point. Sometimes I'll hop on the elliptical later in the day or my walking pad because I'm at my desk for most of the day.
mhm.
And then if I'm riding my horses, it's usually working out, having my shake, going to ride, and then coming back and working. So it is flexible based on, like we're talking about how the day is going to go.
Yeah, and that's the whole key no matter what, like, just finding, like, the eating schedule or frequency or the sustainability that is gonna be able to work for you based off what it is you do and what your work-life balance is. Whatever is
Yeah.
gonna be sustainable for you, that's what you gotta do. I think that's great that you're aware of that and you take all that into consideration. So, we've talked a little bit about keto, carnivore, but we haven't gotten into, like, peptides, biohacking. I know these are all
Sure.
kind of buzzwords that we're
Yeah.
throwing around here, but one question I had for you was because I know you're well versed in the peptide space. We've talked about peptides through like Instagram and gone back and forth a little bit. So I've got some questions here for you. But what are like common keto carnivore myths or oversold tactics around biohacking or peptides that you want listeners to be most aware of?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest myths, especially in the space right now, is that, you can't do carnivore or keto long term.
Mm,
And that, keto or carnivore they're gonna damage your hormones, damage your thyroid, all of that stuff. So I think the biggest issue with this is looking at what else is going on under the surface that are actual blocking factors, regardless of whatever the diet is. So
mm,
hormone imbalances, gut issues, detox issues, nervous system regulation or dysregulation is a huge one, not dealing with underlying trauma and things that are contributing to all of those types of factors, mycotoxin exposure, GI pathogens. Like there are so many things that exist under the surface that we don't realize that sometimes we might just blame a diet for if things aren't necessarily getting better. So that's the first thing as far as
mm.
like misinformation. Well, tell me the second part of the question again
Yeah, it
about,
was, peptides and biohacking, like, what do you
oh,
feel like are
yes.
typically, like, oversold tactics around those things specifically?
I think those things in general are oversold, that they're going to be a cure all for
Mm,
everything.
yeah,
So my approach in general is nutrition is the foundation for everything we do. That's how nutrition the natural way, my practice, got its name. And we always have to build on that foundation. for whatever's next. The hormones, the gut health, the detox health, all the fancy stuff comes after building that foundation. So if we don't have that foundation built first and someone just tries to go do we'll air quote biohacking, whatever the biohack is, or peptides or whatever, they might get a minimal amount of results, but they're
Mm,
not going to get number one, the best results. And number two, I hear people say all the time, well, the peptides didn't work. No, peptides never not work. It all has to do, or I got some side effects from whatever peptides, or this happened or that happened. It always comes back to the foundation and the metabolic function that is happening with the person who's using them. So
mm.
I'm not saying, I just want to be careful and say, like, I'm not saying that peptides can't be added in as an addition once someone is on their way to being optimized in these other areas, because they absolutely have use cases in those scenarios. But when those things aren't being worked on, that's where it's a fancy thing. The grass looks greener on the other side. Someone tries it and it's like, yeah, it didn't work. No wonder it didn't work. So I hope that makes sense.
Oh, it totally makes sense. Like, I mean, going back to what you were saying about the diet being the foundation, I think getting your diet nailed down, that is 95% of the entire equation in terms of how you ultimately want to look. Like, you can leverage your diet and manipulate your diet to change how you feel, how you look, how strong you want to be in the gym. Like, all these things are kind of dictated by like how you feel yourself, what you eat, and also what you don't eat. 100%. But I think a lot of the times, especially in the peptide space, like people hear like BPC 157 or TB 500 and all these different peptides or whatever, and they start taking a lot. And I've taken a lot of these peptides as well.
Yeah.
But I think what people think that they're going to do is be this miraculous thing that changes so many different things. When all actuality, it's like based off what you were saying, it's like, yeah, like, well, the peptide's going to work differently based off like the metabolic functionality of that individual. So if you get the foundation of the house like built right, which is like the diet, how you take care of yourself, like all of these things will probably work a lot better. Like you can't just go outside and ground and get in the sun and walk in your bare feet and think that it's going to cure all these problems. It's like, no, it's just one little small part of the equation. You got to work on kind of like foundation of the house before you start assuming these small little incremental changes you make are going to make these catastrophic changes across the board. I just think that's interesting.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think as well, one thing that we talked about earlier is all the lab work that I do with
Mm,
clients. And so that's another big piece of the puzzle in looking at what someone has going on and how I'm going to devise a protocol, whether it's a supplement protocol, a peptide protocol, but even stepping back from there, how I'm going to help them customize their macronutrients, their ratios, how much protein and fat, as well as carbs if they're eating carbs, and then kind of again building on that. But for a lot of those things, I do rely on that lab testing that the
mm.
client is doing because that's telling me a lot about their metabolism as well. So if I can combine that information and then their protocols and strategies are tailored for their individual needs.
Well, let's talk about that, right?
Yes.
Because let's talk about that. That is a perfect segue into my next question here. Test, don't guess,
Yes.
right? So, how critical is functional blood work and hormone gut panels for someone? Maybe they're doing keto or carnivore, but like, what mistakes do you typically see uh, people make when they skip the testing process?
So I think they end up just carnivoring harder, trying to
Yeah.
do carnivore harder or keto harder or be more strict or restrict more food or whatever the case is. And number one, like I always say, a restriction diet on keto or carnivore is still a restriction diet. Under eating is still under eating. Now, are they eating better quality foods than if they were following just like something that fits, if it fits your macros? Yeah, 100%. But the body still responds. The metabolism still down regulates. They still have the same issues. So, with all that being said, those are the things that we still have to address. And then, as far as like the blood work, of course, if someone doesn't have the means for blood work, then they should try whatever they can try diet wise. But when someone gets to a point where they feel like it's not working, then definitely looking, starting to open up that rabbit hole, so to speak, and to look at comprehensive blood work. And, it's not just one marker, this marker or that marker. It's like I look for patterns. Things should
Hmm.
be correlated and analyzed together. So, what is this test telling us about this test or this test? And then making sure that all of the information is giving me the same message, so to speak, about that client. So, looking at their imbalances and kind of making sure things are aligned so that then the protocol that I design for them is, in fact, what their body needs. And it's going to kind of take them away from the detour that they've been on to get to, to get their body and metabolism down the right pathway again, so to speak.
Absolutely. I mean, it makes all the sense in the world because if you're not testing, you're just guessing. And to your point, if you're on a carnivore diet and you're not testing, but you're also maybe not feeling the best or you're not healing the issues that you set out to heal, whatever the case is, and you just
Hmm.
start carnivoring harder, right? That's not necessarily gonna, that's probably not gonna fix the problem. You got to kind of take a deep dive into your blood work and say, okay, I'm in range here, I'm out of range here. These are the things I need to bring up, or this is probably why I'm feeling bad. Like there's no other way you would know that without testing.
Correct. Yeah. And I think too, like I was told my blood work was normal years ago. I have
Yeah.
clients all the time that get told the same thing. And then when we go over their testing, I'm always looking for optimal ranges. And they always tell me, oh my gosh, I'm so happy to know that it wasn't actually normal, that there's actually something that I can do to fix this because
Mm.
nobody else had answers for me.
And I had a couple questions here on blood work.
Mhm.
I wanted to get into like maybe weird outliers or abnormalities you might see in like keto, carnivore, maybe long-term carnivores. But from what I understand about blood work, and I get my blood work done on a pretty regular basis, it is essentially like a snapshot in time.
Mhm.
I've gone in, I've eaten like 10 eggs before I've gone in the next day to do like fasted blood work, and I shot my cholesterol through the roof. You know what I mean? Are there things that we should take with a grain of salt when we're looking at blood work so we're not making big sweeping changes to our diet and lifestyle based off blood work that was done and taking at a specific point in time? Like, are there like grains of salt we need to take into consideration basically?
So I have multiple answers. That's kind of a tough question to answer because I agree that blood work is a snapshot of what's happening, or any test, really. I mean, I do
Yeah.
urine testing and I do other blood work and all the things. So the test results are always a snapshot. That being said, if they were only a snapshot, then a protocol that I do with a client for 3 months, 6 months, or a year that works to completely change their trajectory of how they're responding to their carnivore or keto diet, and
Hmm.
all of a sudden they're losing weight, losing inches, more energy, less fatigue, sleeping better, working out, building muscle, changing body composition. It's, even if it's a snapshot, it's still a valid way to
Mm.
look at what's happening for them. So I just want to kind of clarify that because I also don't want people to think, well, it's a snapshot of what happened today, but if I go back next week and get the same blood draw done, what if it looks different? So there, context and nuance with everyone for sure. I would say, as far as like an outlier goes, something that I see very, very often, probably 80% of the women over 40 that I work with, everyone blames fasting insulin and
Mm.
insulin resistance, which is still a problem. However, what is stated out there is that if your insulin is perfect, so optimal insulin that I look for is 4 to 6,
Hmm.
lab range is 2 to 22,
Yeah.
by the way. Um, Most of my clients that are weight loss stalled, can't lose, all the complaints that I was just talking about, they have perfect insulin.
Mm.
And science says that if you're on a low carb diet and you can't lose weight, there's no way that you could have perfect insulin. And I see this 80% of the time where their insulin is perfect. So, what does that mean? That means that all these other areas that are a snapshot that we work on.
Hmm.
So, everything from leptin. So, I test leptin levels. We look at adrenal hormones. We look at expanded thyroid markers. I look at detox markers and gut markers and put all those pieces together. That is so much more of the puzzle in many cases, especially for women over 40 going through that perimenopause, menopause, all the hormone changes where doctors are saying like, you can't test your hormones during that time frame because that won't be accurate. Yes, that won't be accurate. You can still derive a protocol and strategies on an individual basis to help that person get to where they want to go. Okay, so I'm on a little bit of a tangent, so you can stop me, but hope that does that kind of answer
Oh,
your question a bit?
well, 100%. Well, basically, what I think you're getting at is going back to their insulin being perfect, but them still not being able to lose weight. It could basically be a whole bunch of other metabolic
Yes,
factors like
right.
stress, cortisol, even those things too, causing them to stall out, correct?
Yes, definitely. And, so many people come to me, so many women with thyroid issues.
Mhm.
Their doctors never look at their adrenals. There's
Yeah.
always an adrenal component when it comes to thyroid. So we always have to look at like hormones are never one one branch of a tree. There's always like they're all connected. Adrenals, sex hormones, thyroid hormones, like they all have a feedback loop for lack of a better term where they talk to each other and they're chemical messengers that talk to each other. And, back to peptides. Peptides are chemical messengers as well. They work differently, but again, if you can get all of these things working together, we do have our own production of endogenous peptides that decrease with age, just like collagen decreases with age, and muscle
Mhm.
mass, if we don't work our muscles, will also decrease with age. So, all these kind of factors that are considered fancy and biohacking and all the things, if they're approached in the right context based on the individual person, what's happening with their body and metabolism, they can all be used as tools to progress, whether that's the next level of biohacking or whether that's just being able to sleep at night and have energy during the day. They're all factors.
Oh, 100%. And since we're on the topic of, like women around 40, which I understand is basically your specific demographic, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So women over 40 dealing with, let's say, stubborn belly fat, hormone imbalance, gut issues, energy crashes, all of the things that you were basically kind of alluding to. What would you say are the top three things that you address for that demographic specifically that most practitioners would overlook?
So the first thing is looking at the body as a whole. So the hormones function with digestion and with liver detoxification. And what I mean by that is I can have a client come to me with a ton of hormone issues, but I work on their digestion, their detoxification systems before we even touch their hormones.
Hmm.
And their hormones improve if I retest their hormones before I technically work on their hormones. So that's number one. And then the other piece of that puzzle is that I get a lot of clients who say that they went to other practitioners and the other practitioner did testing and they basically just got given a random list of supplements with
Mm,
no strategy, no protocol, no time frame. So like take these for no time frame to take it with. So that's another big problem I see where they're just kind of given a list of things to take. They don't know why they're taking them.
yeah.
There's no rhyme or reason to it. There's no therapeutic approach, innovative approach, strategy, et cetera, behind whatever they're given. So there's no systematic way to work on, okay, the digestion, the detoxification, all these other symptoms that are related to the hormones, and then seeing benefits in all these areas. So those are kind of two main things. And then as far as like the belly fat, again, hormones or all these other symptoms, it's kind of getting things aligned. So again, the foundation, taking them from a poorly designed carnivore diet to a properly designed carnivore diet. So
Mm,
I've had this happen a lot recently where someone's carnivore before they come see me. But as soon as I get my little hands on their macro intake, their meal timing, their meal strategies, all the things, their food choices, their protein ratios, the fat, all the things, all of a sudden, magically, the carnivore diet is actually working as opposed to them just eating carnivore foods or what I call carnivore grazing or, things that are still carnivore, but they're just not working for the goals that these women have.
that's really interesting. Let's go into that one because I like the way you said that. There's a properly designed carnivore diet and there would be a poorly designed carnivore diet. And I think this is where people run into a lot of issues. Maybe they're over consuming fat, whatever the case is. So what would you say? And I know this coming out of my mouth right now, this is going to be a little bit different based off of the individual, what they're
Sure.
ultimately trying to attain, right? You can do a high fat carnivore diet for like healing gut, metabolic issues, autoimmune issues, and you can do a low fat carnivore diet for, a couple other things, whether it's weight loss, whatever. What, in your opinion, what would be the difference between a properly designed carnivore diet and a poorly designed one?
So a properly designed So a carnivore diet is likely going to be someone who's either under eating or overeating, eating a ton of dairy, using foods like cheese as protein sources,
Mm,
eating sticks of butter, adding too much fat because there is a threshold for sure, even though a lot of people say there's no threshold. One huge mistake I see is too much fat in the absence of protein. So, too much fat in the absence of protein can actually cause hunger and cravings
mm,
because there's also going to be a level of protein that someone needs to hit in order to have a positive response, so to speak, for lack of a better word, but with cravings, hunger, muscle building, hormone balance, all of that. And that can even be within the context of, I'm going to air quote, a high fat carnivore diet. So
mhm,
for me, like I was high fat and high protein because the other mistake is under eating for sure. So that can affect protein, fat, or overall caloric intake.
mhm,
Other mistakes. So actually, in my weight loss accelerator program, I do a whole session on biggest weight loss carnivore diet mistakes, what to do instead. So I have a lot of them. But another thing that I see is, of course, just like more processed foods, maybe eating, this is going to be very controversial, too much fatty meat.
mm,
So we can't always quantify the, macros, calories, protein, fat, all of that that maybe a ribeye has or a pork
sure,
belly has.
sure.
And, the disclaimer here is like if someone is watching this or listening to this and they're eating ribeyes and pork belly and they've had, amazing weight loss results and amazing carnivore results, like they should keep doing that, right? This is specifically to the person who might not be getting their ultimate results from the way that they're carnivoring at this point in time. And there's so many things, like I said, poorly designed. So, properly designed carnivore diet. So, we're looking at proper meal timing, size of meals, number of meals per day. I'm a big fan of 2 to 3 meals. I am not a big fan of OMAD
Mm,
for nutrient absorption, both for women over 40. So, they're going to be able to absorb and utilize both their protein and fat more in a 2 MAD or 3 MAD scenario than OMAD. And it's hard to get everything we need in one sitting and expect our bodies to utilize and absorb and assimilate all those nutrients at one time. So that's a big factor. And then, other things with properly designed carnivore would be the right protein sources, the right fat sources, the right amounts. So being able to quantify that. So for a lot of women, it's eating leaner meat and added fats. So this is a big key here is it's not just eating leaner meat if they have fat to lose. So I think that we think, oh, if we have fat to lose on our body, we shouldn't consume fat. And that's actually not really the truth because our body can't utilize nutrients from the fat on our body to help, for our fat soluble vitamins and to help with our brain and our focus and energy and all those things. So there just is a way to create that correct deficit without restriction and eating both protein and fat at the same time. And those are just some of the things that would go into a properly formulated carnivore diet. And quite frankly, properly formulated keto or low carb diet as well, because all of those factors can shift over into someone who's keto and not losing weight,
yeah.
or someone who's low carb and not losing weight. They're not making the right food choices. And, the list goes on.
Oh, 100%. And what I always say is fat is the satisfying macronutrient, protein is the satiating one. So if you're eating a poorly formulated keto diet or carnivore diet, and you are completely overeating fat, but you're not even coming close to the protein goals, like, okay, maybe you're in ketosis, but man, that can cause a whole bunch of other issues like weight loss. Like I've had Craig and Maria Emmerich on here, and both of them said like that can even cause like insulin resistance if the fat is too high, believe it or not. Like they have people coming to them all the time from the high fat carnivore space that are insulin resistant. Yeah, and so that's just really interesting to me. Like you absolutely need to be, this goes back to what I think we were saying earlier, being kind of aware of your diet, how you eat, your eating frequencies, but like also being a little bit more cognizant of like the macronutrients of the food, right? Because yeah, if you're overeating fat and you're undereating protein, if fat is the satisfying macronutrient, you're just going to want to consistently eat. You're never going to be full enough. If the protein's not
Right.
high enough, you're not going to get full enough. You're not going to get satiated enough, and you're consistently going to be hungry. You're just going to consume more fat, and that's going to cause people to run into a whole bunch of other issues as well. That's kind of
Yeah.
thing what I think you're getting at, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And the digestive issues kind of come into play there with too much fat and how much protein and all of that as well. So yeah, we're definitely, definitely on the right track as far as all that goes.
Yeah, and since we're on this, how do you balance like high fat, high protein, metabolic reset without triggering hormone or thyroid disruption? Like what signs would you look for or monitor? And then how would you address or adjust the macros or the protocol moving forward?
Sure. So first and foremost, I think that people need to not be in a deficit, caloric deficit for months in a row.
Okay.
So I definitely make a distinction between caloric restriction and caloric deficit. So caloric restriction is something that we have to heal our bodies from that cause hormone issues, et cetera.
Hmm.
And the correct caloric deficit is going to support someone's body metabolism and have them be able to lose weight, drop fat, body recomposition, whatever their goals are, and then also not stay in that deficit for, longer than maybe 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, depending on the person. So kind of cycling up and down as far as the total intake goes that they are consuming to make sure that they're not consistently lowering their total intake, trying to always lose weight. All of
Mm,
that, again, it goes back to the body adapting and
yeah.
then the metabolism down regulating, like we were talking about earlier. So that's a big factor too. And then as far as like the metabolic reset, so that is something that I'll have clients do, like, or I've been doing for a long time, like fat fasting, bone broth fasting. So kind of interjecting those types of things at certain
Interesting.
points. If someone's on a pathogen purge or digestive protocol, a bone broth fast might be appropriate for that because bone broth is so good for gut healing. Or, a fat fast if we know that their digestion is more dialed in and they can tolerate a little bit more fat in their diet and, reducing their protein for, again, it's a period of time. It's a day or 2 days. It's not, 4 months eating 200 grams of fat a day with 20 grams of protein. It's
Yeah.
again kind of something to boost the metabolism, so to speak, and help them from adapting. And, then they get back to their regular, uh,
Yeah, like
total
regular
brain
way of
fart.
life.
Yes,
Yeah.
regular way of eating.
Yeah. No,
Sorry.
and that makes so much sense to me because I think another thing people like, yes, like I look at these diets as tools and I kind of flex them and leverage different low carb variations throughout the week for
Yes.
sustainability purposes.
Mhm.
But yeah, like even your body can adapt to that because the macros are not wildly different from day to day, but I think that something that people forget a lot is if you're running into a weight loss plateau or a stall or whatever, just changing up the eating frequency, the time of the day, right?
Yes.
That can kind of boost your metabolism. Like if your body's always used to eating breakfast at 9, try for a week pushing it down back to like noon or something or whatever the case is. Like I think the body will acclimate and adjust and work really, really hard to acclimate and adjust to whatever it is you're doing. But even changing up the eating frequency, I feel like people can get like a large boost out of if the goal is like weight loss or something like that. Would you agree?
Y Yes, definitely, and I think that changing up that meal frequency in either direction. So if it's somebody that has been eating breakfast at 9,
Mm,
then maybe they're ready to push that to 12 like we were talking about earlier. That's kinda like that fueling before fasting that is part of, like, my kind of approach. I call it my fat burn formula for women over 40. So that, fueling before fasting, making sure that they're fed well before starting to fast. And if they have been actually pushing off their eating window until noon, actually going the other direction. So instead
mm,
of going until 3, which is what most people will do,
yeah,
most women will do, especially because, of course, what do we try to do is eat less and weigh less.
sure.
If they actually go the other direction and move that eating window to start at 9 instead of noon, then that actually can make a big difference as well. So my approach with clients is eat more, weigh less instead of eat less, weigh less.
Interesting. I like that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just moving things in either direction can get things going in the direction that you want. So I know you look at gut health, hormones, lifestyle, and individual variability. How do you decide what level of intervention someone needs? Is it just you're looking at their macros versus deep testing versus functional reset? Like, how do you decide what someone needs?
So I have clients ask me this a lot, and I tell them, like, I can never decide for them. So once I meet with clients for their, first initial what I call jumpstart session, which is the first one-on-one session that I do with a client,
Hmm.
show them the options of all the different testing and various levels that they can commit to. And then we sort of have a conversation based on their struggles, their goals, all, everything that's going on for them. And ultimately, they get to decide their level of commitment, their level of what the testing they want to dig into.
Mm,
The clients that are really ready to kind of like take it to the next level, they typically do go, okay, they want to look at all the things. They want to look at the blood testing and the urine testing, the stool testing, and, the mycotoxins and toxins and things like that, because toxins play a big role in our blocking factors. Or might be someone who's just coming to me for a little bit of a reset, so to speak, where they just want to have a little bit of like, hey, what's going on with my hormones? I just want to kind of a check in kind of thing. That might be the
sure.
person that just gets a comprehensive blood panel, or they do a combination of comprehensive blood panel with thyroid and then an additional hormone panel looking at adrenal, sex hormones, all of that stuff. So I never decide for the client. I never
Mm,
want to be the one to decide it. Of course, I'll guide them based on what they tell me is going on and based on that initial session,
sure.
and say like, hey, this is what I think your baseline should be. But if, you might benefit from considering these tests as well.
Mm,
But it's very important to me that one of the things I learned years ago in one of my very, very first holistic nutrition trainings was that the true definition of health is taking responsibility for yourself. So, in order to support my clients and keep my clients accountable for taking responsibility for themselves, I'm never going to make a decision for them. I'm never going to choose something for them. I'm always going to say, here are the best strategies. Here's what I think is happening. What feels the best for you based on whatever you have going on, your commitment level, your frustration level, all the things that go into making that choice. And it is truly a choice. I tell clients this program should help alleviate your stress, not cause more stress. So based on that, I am, try to empower them to make that choice, and I don't make that choice for them.
that is so well said. Yeah, I mean, I think that goes for just life in general. Like, you gotta take
Yes,
responsibility and accountability for your own
sure,
life. You know what I mean? No, that makes a ton of sense. I also know we're coming up here on time, and I wanted to get into some peptide stuff, and I got a couple questions on peptides.
sure.
So, and I'll lay these questions out here out loud so I don't forget the second one. But
Okay.
so the first question is like what are your top three peptides that you're like really into right now that you're seeing a lot of traction with? But then maybe a second question, and I can repeat the question if you want here, but specifically for the demographic that you are working with, women over 40, would those peptides change? So I guess the first question is, what are your top three favorite peptides right now?
Oh my gosh, how can I pick three?
You
So,
okay, 3 to 5 or you go ahead and lay out as many as you want, it's fine.
okay, so my peptide approach is a little bit different. A lot of people think, oh, I have weight loss and fat loss goals. I'm just going to go right to a GLP. So
Yeah.
that's not
Mm,
really my approach.
sure.
I look at, cellular health, mitochondrial energy, what's happening under the surface. So the mitochondrial peptides are definitely top on my list. So two of those would be SS31 and MOTS-C. So I definitely see a lot of traction with those from energy. So moving from fatigue to having more energy, better sleep, more control over blood sugar and insulin resistance. Of course, that's going to help with food intake, cravings, and to have energy in the gym to work out, all of that stuff. So that is definitely like foundational for me, is sort of like the mitochondrial approach. From there, I mean, yes, I think the GLPs have a lot of value. That said, not everyone is interested in the GLP, and that's okay. So I
Mhm.
definitely think that they have their, we all know, value for weight loss and fat loss. I like to look at them for not only, I just like to say balancing appetite, because nobody should have so much appetite suppression that they don't want to eat, number one. And then second is they do have a positive effect on inflammation, brain health, energy, food, cognition, all of those things when cycled and stacked and used correctly. So it should never be you're just going on any peptide to just stay on the peptide forever. I just want to be super clear about that. And then other peptides, so the healing peptides, the BPC, the TB500, the GHK, all of those have
Mhm.
multiple benefits, from gut health to healing to joint pain and inflammation if someone is kind of dealing with some of that stuff. So that, definitely top of the list as well. And then we could get into like some of the more weight loss and fat loss peptides that would be non-GLP. So like 5-amino 1-MQ, sloop is another one. All of these peptides that can help with metabolic function and improving overall metabolic function so that all of our body systems and all of the things that we're trying to achieve on a daily basis basically kind of work better, so to speak. And so I think, you know, again, like that, just today answering that question right
Yeah.
now, those are, then I could also go into like, we could look at some of the ones that are going to reset circadian rhythm. I know we've talked about like the epitalon and pinealon and that kind of thing too, because that can help with sleep, right? So, what is sleep going to benefit? Weight loss and fat loss,
Yeah.
hormone balance. So, they all kind of play together
Yeah.
well. But I caution saying that because you just don't want to start 10 peptides at one time and think that they're all going to work properly together. So we always want to like look at what is the most important thing, what's going on, and then kind of work from there with the different cycles and different stacks and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's where someone like you would come into play because people can get peptides or whatever from almost anywhere now online, but if you're working with someone like you that knows how to stack them specifically,
Right.
right, and then cycle them specifically, spend a certain amount of time on and then off, that makes a lot of sense. And then and then going back to the second part of my question, maybe here's a better way to ask it. So for the demographic that you are specifically working with, what
Yes.
would you say are the three most common peptides or top five common peptides that you find yourself prescribing to women over 40 that are either looking to lose weight.
Sure.
I know that could be a GLP-1, but like energy, mood, whatever the case is, balancing hormones, like what would those typically be?
So first, just to clarify, I don't prescribe anything. I don't diagnose, treat, cure, or prescribe anything. So everything is based on, recommendations and research and all of that. So I just want to be super clear about that.
Mhm.
And the list doesn't change much based on your second question. So I think all of those things in the context of what clients are coming to me for, the weight loss, the fat loss, the energy, the mood, the sleep, the body composition, especially building muscle, dropping fat, all,
Mhm.
metabolic function overall. My approach is still the same. I mean, we could still get into like, there's peptides that sort of are next level to the ones that I mentioned, but those would be sort of like more the foundational pieces. Then we have the bioregulators. So bioregulators help with different body systems, and that's going to depend on what we're working on. So with bioregulators, all bioregulators are peptides, but not all peptides are bioregulators.
Mm.
So there's a lot of different facets and ways to sort of approach this. And, again, just, your question, they still kind of are all in the same realm as the ones that, that we were just talking about. But then again, like is someone coming to me and they're going to do one stack and one cycle? Or is someone coming to me and they're ready for, 5 cycles, and that means I get to do 5 peptide stacks with them. So
Yeah.
that approach might change too, because the person that I'm going to be with longer term is going to be, not the one stack, one cycle client that's going to be with me for 3 months. It's like, I'm just going to say like what's coming to my mind, like what's the quick and dirty that we're going to get them, the result, some results and some next level results as fast as we can. And
Yeah.
I cringe saying that because nothing I do is quick fix. And so,
Yeah.
but just in the context of the question is going to be different from the person that is the 5 stack, 5 cycle, 6 months to 10 months to a year, where they're like in it for the long run kind of thing, So I hope that makes sense. I just want to say, like, I'm not a quick fix, but I hope that, again, that helps.
Oh, no, it totally helps, and I hope anyone listening to this understands that peptides are not gonna be peptides, biohacking, like we were talking about earlier, going out and grinding for 5 minutes, like, these are all part of the larger picture, nothing's gonna
Yes.
be a quick fix, like
Yeah.
yeah, like, this whole health, wellness, game plan, it's a long-term journey you gotta be on, and you gotta do it right and start with the foundational aspects, and in my opinion, it all kinda starts with the basics. It's, what are you eating? Like, what's your food? What are you drinking? How are you moving? How are you sleeping? How's your relationship with other human beings? You get those things figured out, and then you start layering in like peptides and all the fancy stuff.
Yeah, and I just, I was thinking peptides. I just want to kind of add to that because there are
Sure.
some there's some amino acids like L-carnitine and glutathione
Yeah.
that are also integral pieces of liver detox health, like we were talking about earlier, fat loss, you know, uh, energy, ATP, mitochondrial health that kind of play with those peptides in the same context.
Yep.
So I just want to say, like, there, there's just so much you can do.
Absolutely. Well said. Okay, going into the rapid fire portion
Okay.
of the rapid fire Q&A portion. And what I was going to say here is, that your answers don't necessarily have to be like rapid fire answers. Feel free to like elaborate on them. But first question here, what's the biggest lie women over 40 are told about fat loss?
The biggest lie is eat less, weigh less.
Well said.
Yeah.
If someone is
Simple.
super simple, I love it. If someone is doing keto or carnivore perfectly, but still not losing weight, what, in your opinion, what's the real reason?
Likely some underlying blocking factor that is either a physiological hormone digestion detox issue or a bigger unpopular opinion that is harder to work on is the emotional trauma side of things.
Mm,
Dysregulated nervous system, underlying trauma that hasn't been dealt with. That in and of itself is huge for women. And I always say it's the hardest work to do because, quite frankly, anyone can follow a macro formula, anyone can follow a supplement protocol. But when it comes to digging deep into the reasons why our nervous system might be dysregulated or there might be emotional trauma that we don't realize is still there, that's where the real work comes in. And,
mm.
for some women, that's what they really have to do in order to get to that place where all of the fancy supplement protocols, peptide protocols, and all the other things work much better.
Well said. So well said. What's one healthy habit women are told to do that you think is actually sabotaging their progress?
I would say too much cardio. So, too much cardiovascular exercise. And I, again, tread with caution on this when my husband and I were actually just talking about this last night. It's not that women shouldn't do any cardio training because we all know as we get older, we need to, have our cardiovascular health. And there's a place for resistance training and there's a place for cardiovascular training. But when the cardiovascular training is too much, they're overly stressed.
Mhm.
They've got stuff going on with their adrenals and their cortisol, and that might be high cortisol or low cortisol because both are problematic. And too much cardiovascular exercise in relationship to their resistance training, that all is a problem.
Yeah, and what's interesting too, specifically about like women, depending on where they're at with their cycle, um,
Yes. We
you
didn't even,
know,
yeah, we didn't even talk about like as it relates to cycling, but all of like so much with macros and exercise and food can be related to that as well.
yeah,
Fasting
like
too.
depending on where you're at, like if you're in a luteal phase or whatever the case is, if you're doing like high intensity interval training, like in the wrong phase, like you can completely tank your hormones, like your cortisol can go through the roof. Like women specific, and it's still so crazy to me how different women are than men in terms of like their hormones. But it's like, yeah, like women should just be very aware of their cycle, what phase of their cycle that
Hmm.
they're in. But then I was talking to Dr. Jen Flegger about this, but structuring your diet when you're going to fast and your workout intensity around your cycle for a woman makes so much sense to me instead of just like doing CrossFit every single day,
Right.
and fasting like every single day.
Correct.
It's like, man, that's going to crush you.
Yeah, and that's, I take a cyclical approach with my clients and actually regardless of whether they're cycling perimenopausal, which is of course they're feeling like their cycles are crazy and all over the place,
Yeah.
or they've already hit menopause and they're postmenopausal, I still very much utilize a cyclical approach to macros, to their overall consumption, to their fasting, to their exercise, etc. Again, going back to what we were talking about earlier with the body adapting, that makes a big difference. And the other thing about, like you're talking about, like doing things based on the cycles, there are some women that actually can push harder in the second half of their cycle than the first half of their cycle.
Mm,
So if anyone is like that and is listening, I don't want people to feel like they're, out of the ordinary or there might be like on another planet because that's
mm.
the case. I think that listening to your body is ultimately the best approach as well.
Yes, 100% agree. What's the most overlooked root cause of stubborn fat? Would you say it's hormones, gut, stress, or something else?
Most overlooked root cause of
Stubborn belly fat,
stubborn belly fat or
or just
stubborn fat
stubborn
in
fat in general.
yeah. I truly believe that is focusing on the liver detoxification system. So lymphatic drainage, liver detox, toxins. I believe that that is one of the most underrated, under-discussed cause of lack of fat loss.
Well said. Okay, last one here. If you could get every woman to change one thing about how she eats, what would it be and why?
Oh my gosh. Let's see. I would probably wanna make sure that they're getting enough protein and enough fat. And
Mm,
I do believe that that sounds a little cliche because it's kind of like, the keto carnivore low carb approach has it's now like we talked about earlier, it's not as it's much more mainstream than it was 20 years ago when I got into this.
mhm.
But for whatever reason, I still see the undereaters. I still see, now that's not to say I still see overeaters as well. So just changing that up and making sure that they're getting, that right balance of protein and fat for their body and their metabolism, I think is ultimately a huge key.
Yeah, and I think what happens too with just the carnivore diet, keto, whatever, I think people gravitate towards these diets because the way that they're positioned online, on Instagram is like, oh, I can eat all the meat or the butter that I want and I can lose weight and feel great. And people love that because they don't have to consciously do anything. They're like, "Oh, I can just eat meat and lose a ton of weight," or whatever the
Right.
case is, and that's all I gotta do. But it's like, also too, you should consider doing a little bit of tracking because most people grossly undercalculate their protein, and one of the reasons why they might still be hungry or starving later on in the day when they ate, like, a handful of cheese is they probably didn't get enough protein. So, yeah, 100%. If you just start tracking a little bit, becoming a little bit more aware, especially of protein and fat, and how much you're taking in, that I think can set someone up for success. But I don't think people. I feel like people doing these diets don't want to track. I feel like the people that just jump on the bandwagon and then do the diet and then they say they didn't get results, it's because they didn't spend any time really taking into consideration like what they were actually putting in their body. Was it enough?
Yes.
And I think that's a big problem with the diet.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of tracking, and I know it's kind of an unpopular opinion, especially in the carnivore space. And I think when someone first starts, they don't need to track. But for me personally, in my own journey, when I had to go from teaching myself both physically and mentally that I needed to eat more and that
Mm,
1,200 calories wasn't going to get me the body composition that I was looking to achieve. I had to track to make sure that, and I shifted, I call it a mind shift, to I am tracking to make sure that I'm eating enough and to make sure that my body gets enough nutrients on a daily basis. Because it can be mentally challenging to go from 1,200 calories or trying to eat as little as 1,200 calories to 17 to 1,800 calories. And that was kind of like my baseline for fat loss, which sounds like some people are probably going to listen to this and think, oh my gosh, that sounds like an incredible amount of food. It is a lot of food when you've only been eating 1,200 calories. So
yeah.
I'm a big fan of macro tracking. I think that, one of the mistakes women make is not being aware of what they're actually eating for sure.
Mhm.
So definitely is, definitely a big proponent for that.
Percent. And then before we wrap up here, Danny, anything new coming up for you?
Okay, so coming up, I have my weight loss accelerator program. So I run that program 2 to 3, maybe 4 times a year. It's an online program. I love it. I'm really just dialing in all the foundational pieces. What I find with a lot of women is that they've tried a lot of things and they're doing all the things at different times. They're
Mhm.
never doing them in their correct way, customized for their own body metabolism in the right time frame. So that's
Mm.
what I teach and guide in that program. I also, of course, have my online community, which is called the Wellness Collective, and we do everything beyond diet in there. So, all kinds of topics from Zoom topics on adrenals and thyroid and peptides, and many of the, common topics that are in the space and self-sabotage and hunger patterns and all those things. So that's definitely something that I love. And as far as like looking forward to, I just like to speak on what's happening in the space and what topics are upcoming and the different controversy because I have a lot of unpopular opinions, but I also like to bring the truth for people to really have all the context they need instead of like one side or another side of the
Sure.
story. They need to have like all sides of the story. So that's uh that's just a couple of upcoming things.
Very cool, very cool. And, where can people find you online, get in contact with you, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so my website, nutritionthenaturalway.com, that's a great place to inquire. I also spend a lot of time on my Instagram, which is at Dani Conway Official. I do a lot of Q&A in my stories and, try to just put a lot of valuable information out there. One of the reasons years ago that one of the things that I was passionate about years ago was, dispelling a lot of misinformation that's out there. So I continue to do that. I also have a Facebook group as well.
Very cool, and I'll make sure to put all of that stuff in the show notes so people will have access to it. But honestly, Dani, this was a really, really good conversation. I think the listeners are gonna get a ton of value out of it. I appreciate your time, and,
Absolutely.
yeah, for everyone else listening to the Low Carb Consultant podcast, we'll catch you guys on the next one.
Thanks for having me, Max. Take care.